I was 18, and in a gap year before university, I applied to volunteer in a developing world context and was posted to a former mission hospital in the rolling hills of Transkei, where the Pondo people live, a clan of the Xhosa tribe. That part of South Africa is utterly breathtaking in its beauty, yet heartrending in its poverty. I tell you, the barriers of race and culture and language and politics were shocking, and yet the joy with which my fellow volunteer Barbara and I were welcomed was utterly remarkable, as was the faith of the Christians we encountered there. They shone like beacons, and they lived their lives in dependence on God like I had never seen before. I want to tell you about one day, one remarkable, memorable day in a life-changing year there. It was the day that one of the mamas from church invited Barbara and I to her home. We walked for quite a long time in the direction of the sunset, as she put it. And when we got there, there being a small compound consisting of some maize growing beside a round mud hut furnished with a plastic chair and some rolled up grass bedding mats. When we got there, we were welcomed like royalty. Neighbours came to pay their respects. We must have greeted about 50 friends and relatives. And when it came time to eat, we were presented with 2 steaming plates piled high with mealie meal, with some greens, and with some fried chicken. I tell you, we didn't see a lot of meat that year, even at the hospital where we lived. It was a very rare delicacy. Very uncomfortably, etiquette demand that people watched while we ate, even pressed us for seconds. Very uncomfortable, surrounded as we were by so many hungry mouths. And it wasn't until the long walk home that Barbara and I had chance to process what had happened. In fact, it took all week. This was not a wealthy compound where goats and hens strutted around. We didn't see any chickens. So where did our friend procure that chicken with which she fed us? Only later did we learn that she had slain her one and only chicken to feed us, to feast us, to offer us hospitality, to thank us for the honour of visiting her home. Truly, I tell you, here is a poor widow who has given more than I had ever given. For when I give out of my abundance. But she, out of her poverty, had given all that she had to live on. That's my experience of the widow and her 2 copper coins. I may harbour questions about the wisdom of my friend's giving. Her children sorely needed that chicken far more than Barbara and I did, just as surely as the disciples surely might have queried why the widow gave her last pennies to the temple treasury of all places. But like my Xhosa friend, the widow is giving everything she has to God, not holding back, in vulnerability and thanksgiving and faith. And I'm sure she had multiple reasons not to do so. Life is fragile. Won't this make it harder? Life is unjust. Why should I be thankful in circumstances of racial inequality and grinding poverty? Life is so uncertain. What if the deadly pestilence strikes my home, my family? Even so, this widow gives everything she has to God in radical, single-minded devotion. She is clear about what is clear, about what will hold, about what matters in the end, amidst so much else that is unclear. She may not be sophisticated in her giving, but she's transparent and wholehearted, and it's an expression of her faith. Now, this isn't very home counties, is it? What might it be saying to us? I suggest these women point up some of our challenges, our financial wisdom, our complex world, our diverse investments, our confusing and confused priorities, not to mention our mortgage and our car payments and those university fees coming up, and there's always more. Our sheer abundance becomes disabling, which is to say, if we're not careful, our wealth turns into our poverty, our spiritual poverty. Let's consider what it is about this widow's generosity that Jesus commends. It's not the impact on the spreadsheet, the size of the contribution in absolute terms, because surely other gifts were far greater. Yet, Jesus says, this woman has given more than all the others. Perhaps the measure of our giving is not how much we give, but how much we keep back. In other words, the proportion. It's a well-established rule from the Old Testament to tithe, to give 1/10 of our gains. But this woman is not applying any formula to calculate some designated sum. She doesn't assume that 90% is hers. She ascribes 100% to God. So, I wonder, is Jesus addressing the spirit with which she's giving? Her single-minded trust, her humble simplicity, her self-effacing anonymity? Though Jesus really blows that, doesn't he? I've also noted her naivety, given that she's not asking questions about the who and how of where the money gets spent. She gives out of a different sensibility than those who have the luxury of authority or choice at their fingertips, like the scribes and Pharisees. She gives because at her core, she lives in utter dependence on God. She holds nothing back. And Jesus highlights her transforming power. Yes, a woman, one of the poorest, perhaps one of the oldest, one perceived to be the most powerless. It is she, in reality, who is not only a role model, but the engine of true faith, of true religion, of healthy church. This passage is sometimes referred to the widow and her mite, and I think might should be spelt M-I-G-H-T. And at this point I want to pause and say thank you. Thank you to those of you who can relate to this widow. Perhaps of those of you who wouldn't dream of thinking you relate to this widow, but in whom others recognise the same devotion. It's not just that our churches are propped up by such people, it's that the health of the church depends on them, those who give their all to Jesus. Perhaps in their sunset years or after life has served up a fair few tragedies. Who does this widow make you think of in your church or community, I wonder? Often enough, it's those who feel they've got nothing left who give the most, whether in terms of money or in time or talent. Perhaps they've come to know Jesus through their loss or in the act of self-emptying. If anything in this description finds an echo in your life, then I'd love you to hear these thanks, not least when so much giving goes unnoticed or feels taken for granted. Jesus notices every last penny, and especially the last penny, when you reach the very end of all you've ever saved up. And then I want to end with a challenge. What might Jesus be saying to us through this poor widow? It seems to me he is asking each of us to review not just how much do I give, but how much am I keeping back? He's urging that for all of us who live by faith to reconsider how we might live in greater dependence on God. How can I give God my all? And if you've ever struggled with making faith more concrete, I suspect he might urge you to focus particularly on the matter of money. I know it's not very British to talk about money. I feel awkward even just talking to my iPhone when I don't have eye contact with you on the subject. But this widow demonstrates that giving is not just a transaction on a balance sheet. No, our financial giving is about the giver, not just about the gift. It is the most tangible signal of faithful discipleship, of a pure heart, of total following. It gets to the core of our being. What or who do I serve? What matters? And what do we fear? Do we suspect Jesus here of a scam? I mean, is he luring us into poverty and destitution? I don't think so. In truth, he is offering us a whole new world, a world of abundance, real riches, life at its best. My experience in South Africa was life-changing. Crudely, I found myself in my riches jealous of those Xhosa people in their poverty, because they had a joy in life and a simplicity of living and a faith in God that I longed for. It was the jolt that my spiritual life needed. It turned a fair few priorities upside down for me. How I would love to find that wonderful mama whose life reshaped my life with a richer glimpse of God's abundance. Alas, she will never know the impact of her giving. It's just the same for the widow who Jesus observed. And yet her actions, her wholehearted, whole person, whole life giving reveals to us the wholehearted, whole life, whole person giving of the Saviour of the world. The Saviour who walks in the direction of the sunset to offer everything for us, and then returns again and again and again to find us, to eat with us, to transform our living and our giving into abundance, until, pray God, we may become that sort of person, the sort of person through whom others glimpse the abundance of God, the beauty, the integrity, the simplicity, the generosity of the one who gives everything to each of us and to all of us.